these wars will go on. Syria remains occupied.
Yeah.
And it is Trump who told Israel that why doesn't Israel go and finish off Iran? President Putin was bluffing when he said that if US manufactured or US
Weapons,
weaponized
yeah.
us, we will treat it as NATO waging war on us. They thought it was a bluff. But once they released this new missile, which the West has nothing like that, then they realized, Biden himself, that their attempt to call Russia's bluff, it proved that Russia was not bluffing. They will cross the threshold. The United States might be the world's greatest democracy, but it has been the biggest supporter of some of the worst dictatorships. Whereas the Soviet Union might not have been a democracy in the sense that we understand the Westminster model of democracy, but it has been probably the most supportive of all liberation forces against imperialism, against colonialism throughout 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Arab countries are more afraid of the Palestinians who are more modern-minded and progressive because they don't want their own people who are controlled by, despotic rulers to get any ideas of freedom, liberation or modernity from the Palestinians. And this is not happening now. This has been happening from the 70s.
According to you, is the most successful dictator. Putin is also in a sort of, he got 98%, 99% of votes, which can happen only in, a place like Russia.
No, but there are many ways to fix an election. I don't want to go into examples. Not all of it might
We
be
can, of
practical
course.
to us.
That's why we are having this chat.
Yes.
Hello and welcome. This is One India podcast. And today we have with us Shastri Ramachandran. He's a senior journalist with 51 years of experience, and that too not in India, but China, Nepal, multiple countries in Europe. But today he is with us to tell us more. How is China? Why Indians hate China? What is the war in China? And why China is going to play a very important role with the war which is happening in Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Lebanon, and Iran. Thank you so much for your time, Shastriji. And of course, we are going to have a longer conversation about what is China.
Thank you, Nagin. I'm glad I came. Now, what is China is a very big question. It's like the story of the elephant and five blind men. Each will say, what is China? China I find to be a very fascinating place. Okay, it's as populous as India, and it is as many places you can feel the population pressure as in India. So in some ways one can say it is familiar. It is expected after all a country with such a big population.
Right.
But where China beats India, if you ask me as one who stays in India and Delhi, is that during all my years in China, off and on, short stints, long stays, everything, not once did I experience a power cut. Not once was there a kind of cut in water supply, which was a very, very surprising thing. And when I saw China first in 2008, it really took my breath away. Because till then, many things which one saw was in Europe. Technology, then all these kind of, state-of-the-art development and so on, electricity, power, water, roads, transport. The development was always associated with capitalism, and capitalism is a very high form of development.
Right.
But when I saw China, that another country with population which is not more or less the same as India could attain all these things, it was cause to believe that maybe India too can reach that level of development of infrastructure. So this is the thing that struck me most. And another thing that's common to both India and China even today are the traffic jams. And sometimes in the roads leading to Beijing, there are traffic jams which continue for hours and even a few days sometimes.
Right. So what surprised you the most? Of course, what do you think Indians are anti-China? Is it just because of the war, or there is a narrative which has been set? What is really happening? Chinese are so bad that the Indians should be hating them, whatever they do.
I can't understand why this. I think this is something that has been fed into people, through a kind of public discourse that we have and the kind of images that you create,
Right.
that somebody is an enemy. It is probably the need of the one big country to have another as big country as an enemy, because we have had, not just now, even earlier, in politics you always need another. It's not just true of India,
Right.
but it's true of many countries, including the US. It has shown for long years the Soviet Union as the evil empire and so on, and now the US also points to China. And because we very much identify with the Anglo-American axis
Right.
and their perception of world affairs, and we are influenced by their perspectives, and also we have internalized their prejudices against all these countries. So our view of China is actually educated, or rather we have been de-educated on China by what we read from the West. So this is one. And otherwise, when you go to China, you don't find any of the Chinese who are unfriendly. Secondly, the war was a long, long time ago. The war was in 1962. If we ask anybody, nobody would remember what the war was about or when it was, how many
But
days
they
it
do
was.
remember the war for one thing. Was Nehru responsible for this war? We still have the standoffs. And who is responsible for that? Because now we keep hearing that Nehru was responsible for most of the mistakes that he did. It is because of him that today we are still having standoffs on the borders.
Well, any government that was there at that time, one could point a finger at them of having been responsible.
But you have mentioned in your book a lot about Nehru did commit some mistakes at that time.
No,
When it was about fixing the...
all prime ministers, even the greatest of them, commit mistakes first. Second, if we blame Nehru, then aren't we blaming China at all for what happened? So this is a question. Or are we so obsessed with blaming the prime minister of India of that time that we don't want to look at it? I simply want to ask this question. If being at war with one country, okay, I can understand our hostility to Pakistan. In 2000 years, China and India had one military conflict, big one.
Right.
The other was just a clash in 2020. Secondly, if it is the war, why do we love America so much? Please tell me. I mean, after all, in Kissinger's own book, in all US accounts, it is officially acknowledged that during the 1971 war, all the countries which we embrace, France, Britain, all of the West, led by the United States, were pitted against India on the side of Pakistan, and they were encouraging China also to perhaps attack from there. But why is there no hostility towards any of these countries? We love France, we love
Why not?
UK, we love US.
So why shouldn't we have a democracy?
Yes.
I'm sorry, we should not say democracy, but China is a dictatorship. So why shouldn't we have a similar setup here? We can also develop the same way as China has over the years.
No, but again, there are democracies and democracies. There cannot be just one model of democracy. Nor
But
is
should
there
we
one-
apply the same kind of scenario in India? Will it be, because many want Narendra Modi ji ruling for years. Even yesterday we had a politician from BJP who said,
think
why not?
The Indian temperament and the South Asian temperament is very, very different. Even if somebody is dictatorial, it is not possible to have the kind of dictatorship in India or anywhere in South Asia that prevails. The authoritarian,
Singapore is one of
the
the
authoritarian
examples.
model of.
But Singapore is one of the examples.
No,
they have their PM
that's what
for
I'm coming
ages.
to. Singapore is a dictatorship, and we all love Singapore. People say, "Oh, the streets of Singapore are so lovely; you can eat on them." And when it comes to Singapore's dictatorship, nobody says anything. Why? Because it's an important center. Eyes, ears, everything of Western intelligence, Western strategic interest, all those things. And of course, they speak English. So all of it makes Singapore a very desirable dictatorship. But then it is not just Singapore. So are the other neighbors are also dictatorships. So is Vietnam. So is Russia. We've had such a long, flourishing friendship with Russia, but we've never seen Russia as a dictatorship. And even today we don't. And so to call one country a democracy, another a dictatorship, to have clear black lines that you cut with a sword, death on one side and life on the other, I don't think it makes sense,
Right.
Because if you look at it, it's very strange. If you look at recent history, say last 40, 50 years, the United States might be the world's greatest democracy, but it has been the biggest supporter of some of the worst dictatorships. Whereas the Soviet Union might not have been a democracy in the sense that we understand the Westminster model of democracy, but it has been probably the most supportive of all liberation forces against imperialism, against colonialism throughout 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Who, according to you, is the most successful dictator? Putin is also in a sort of, he got 98%, 99% of votes, which can happen only in, a place like Russia.
No, but there are many ways to fix an election. I don't want to go into examples. Not all of them
No,
might
we
be
can, of
practical
course.
to us.
That's why we are having this chat.
Yes. Yeah.
We'll beep wherever we need to.
Yes. So, you see, now I recently traveled to Russia, and I was really surprised. There is so much of democracy in the world, and many countries are very democratic. But why aren't there reports from Russia in any of these countries? Please tell me.
We are reporting every day, at least 5 stories
Yeah.
from Russia.
And I traveled to, no, even in Indian newspapers didn't have. And, Russia is the day. But I found that people are really happy with Putin. Whether they'll be happier without Putin,
This is
that's
very
a different thing.
controversial statement. I mean, we know how West. There is also Navalny, who
Yeah.
was killed in the
Yes.
jail. But how can you say that Putin? If you ask Navalny's
But
wife,
there are people are killed in democracies as well by the state. The killing of opponents and dissidents and jailing them is not limited to dictatorships. It is as brutal and ruthless in democracies, particularly in the democracies of Asia, because it might be a very unkind thing to say about ourselves. But all Asian democracies, to a large extent, are authoritarian. There is authoritarianism built into the democracies of Asia, in one way or the other.
so we are living in a fake perception of this democracy and dictatorship fight.
Not fake, it is evolving, I would say. Because, in the sense, 20 years ago, we did not elect the kind of people to parliament or our representative bodies that we elect today. The issues were not framed the way they
You
were.
have complaints with Modi ji? When you're saying
I don't
don't
have any
elect-
personal complaints, but I think the present government leaves a lot to be desired. For instance, I think it would be much better, for instance, when we are speaking up for minorities in Bangladesh, if we had a better record than we have. Doubtless, India's record of dealing with minorities is not bad given the complexity of the situation and things like that, and the competitiveness of political parties who are all equally cynical and treat them as vote banks. But
Right.
for all that, if we had a better record, we would have been more credible when we are criticizing Bangladesh or Pakistan or other countries.
Now, coming back to this China stuff, I mean, when we were students, we read about the string of pearls, very famous line that China is building a string of pearls. Now, our relations with Sri Lanka, we were just talking few minutes back about Maldives. Then, of course, Pakistan is there, which is almost on the verge of, demolition. I mean, we don't see that Imran Khan will become, a prime minister again. And people are dying, policemen are being killed. So overall, China is, of course, investing in all these countries majorly, heavily. So how do you see China is, of course, trying to control India in this manner?
No, all countries are exercising control.
But China is, we feel like it is their goal to,
it is the
cage
goal of the-
India around the neighbors.
No, I don't subscribe to the string of pearls theory. Actually, long back it was produced by in some American think tank. It's been completely discredited in the last 30 years. And people just keep recycling the string of pearls theory. If, let us assume for purpose of argument, leaving India aside, if China is really such a threat, why is the US doing so much business with China? Please tell me. It's the world's greatest democracy. On the one hand, they should have no problem with China because China is not getting into the spheres of influence of the US. It is Russia that has been doing that and has posed security challenges to the US. So why is at one level the US so heavily invested in China? And actually even China's the repressive infrastructure that is there, the surveillance technology everywhere. Today it's there. You don't know whether it's a prison or a 5-star hotel.
Right.
They can tell the movement of everybody who is a resident there. So technology has made that happen. So Almost all the repressive technology that is used by China or any dictatorship is from these Western countries. If they are serious about this, why don't they stop sharing this technology or selling these technological products? That's my first question. Second, the US and China remain the biggest economies in the world.
Yeah.
Okay? And no two countries have as much of a trade as the two of them.
You wrote they are the G2s.
Yeah, they are the G2. And even during COVID, there were reports of consignments of this COVID, kits and things
Yeah.
like that, which first landed in Chennai. And then quickly they were taken back and sent to the US. They were from China. So even China would prefer to do. And now France, the German Chancellor goes, why are they all dealing with China if it is such a big threat?
So Europe, West, India, do everybody, they all want to just bash China for their political gain?
No, I think the whole thing is to show the rest of the world that the best place to live is the United States. There is no, if there is paradise on earth, it is this, it is this, it is the United States. This is about the marketing of a world, aspirational world to which everybody should aspire, which is very ironic when all those countries are raising higher and stronger walls against people of the southern nations, but they are marketing that, and there is no room for entry.
So when China becomes stronger, of course it is quite strong, and they are in comparison with USA. There was a time when we used to think that India will surpass China in terms of factories and production and all that. However, I think that this is a distant dream now for Indians. But world is at war, and China has a very major role to play. And we keep talking of World War III, and that scenario is not far. This is not hypothetical question that if World War III happens, of course, if we say if, but maybe we are already at World War III.
Maybe the first impulses of World War, the first triggers, and the first shots have already been fired. We really don't know, given what is happening in Ukraine and what is happening, the kind of continuing Israeli genocide in Palestine, And you look at 70% of Israel's war, or genocidal war, I would say, is funded and financed, and ammunitions are provided by the United States. So the United States is involved in both these wars, both Ukraine and
course.
it's the world's biggest arms manufacturer, and manufacture of weapons and ammunition is the mainstay of the US economy, which has always been referred to, including by its own very well-known diplomats like Chester Bowles and all, who were ambassadors during the time of Nehru, as a military-industrial complex.
But that's why people are saying that the war might stop, because Biden was followed by the lobbyist who was selling weapons. And now Trump is someone who has no war business. He is not selling weapons. And Elon Musk and Donald Trump might help to end the war.
I think that is a very superficial perception of Trump, because Trump is not opposed to NATO. Trump is not opposed to the expansion of NATO eastward.
But he says that we should not be spending money on NATO.
Exact. All that he says is that the US should not spend money on it. Germany, Sweden, and the European countries should buy arms from the US and then fight the war. He is not saying they will stop manufacturing weapons, or he is saying they should have no expense. He is not opposed to the war. The US, structurally, theoretically, and for sound economic reasons, can never afford a war-free world. One of the most decent personalities as a human person who was a head of government is Barack Obama. But the largest number of wars were unleashed under Obama.
Yeah.
This is beyond the control of any president. These wars will go on. Syria remains occupied.
Yeah.
And it is Trump who told Israel that why doesn't Israel go and finish off Iran? So these things are there, And Trump is just to be nationalist, inward-looking, doesn't make a country anti-war. There are 800 US military bases worldwide. How many military bases does China have outside? Maybe one or a half-baked one in Djibouti or some such thing. Yeah. How many military bases does India have? But it is these same powers, France, Britain, the same pre-World War II powers that have military.
Quickly,
Yes.
I'll just
Yeah.
take many questions because I think we have lesser time.
Yeah.
But this war is something, two wars, of course, Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, of course. So where are both these wars heading? Do you think that it is going to end in near future, or Ukraine will, give up the war to Putin? Where do you
as-
see it is going?
as I
Putin
see-
keeps saying that I will attack, bhai, I'll attack. He keeps saying I'll attack, I'll have nuclear war if NATO gets involved, or Britishers send their troops. We have seen videos of British troops fighting for Ukraine. All that is happening, but Putin keeps threatening. But what should we expect?
No, first to take Ukraine, which started before this Israeli genocide in Palestine. Ukraine, I think they have reached more or less the limit because they thought President Putin was bluffing when he said that if US manufactured or US
Weapons,
weaponized
yeah.
us, we will treat it as NATO waging war on us. They thought it was a bluff. But once they released this new missile, which the West has nothing like that, then they realized, Biden himself, that their attempt to call Russia's bluff, it proved that Russia was not bluffing. They will cross the threshold. So now they have a rethink. And I think this Ukraine war will get frozen. Frozen in a way, it will never be resolved, but it will remain a kind of a...
Like it was in
Yeah,
2014.
Russia will keep the areas it has occupied because the West would like the areas that Russia has not yet taken. Now they will freeze the war because the West knows it can never win the war and they don't want... Ukraine is a granary, 66% of the world's resources, and a lot of it is there in Ukraine, are all to the east of the Mediterranean, and the West wants this. The second thing, as far as Israel is concerned and the Palestinian, what they have made sure is that the Palestinian question will never ever be resolved. After the kind of massacres they have carried on day after day, and it shows that the Israelis, backed by the entire Western world, are only capable of killing defenseless women and children,
Right.
which is what they have been mercilessly doing. And the whole Western world is witness to an unprecedented genocide. There has been no genocide like this in human history.
But of course, Hamas was responsible. They killed 1,200 in such a
No,
massacre.
I'm sorry, I disagree there. If you say that the problem began in
Of course,
October,
the problem is
Yes.
50 years,
Yes.
100 years, 500 years, whatever we say.
no, I'm not
But
going-
at least now give up. Like Palestinians, why do you have to continue this fight for one space of worship? Let's grow together. I mean, now you have to accept what happened in 1947 or
No, not 47.
when the country Israel was made.
No, it did not stop there. No, it has been a slow. What nobody reports is that every day Israel is expanding its territory to Palestine.
Of course, Palestine is over
So
that way.
The Palestinians, especially people in Gaza, they have been pushed to a point that they will only perish. Either they will die a slow death, where Israel picks them off little by little, pushes the entire population into a ghetto, and they perish. So they must have said, anyway, we are destined to die if we don't fight back. So this is the last desperate hit back of a people who know they would die anyway. That's how it should be seen in the right person. The problem did not begin in October 7. I'm not referring to the problem that began even in 47. Since then, Israel has never been restrained. And even in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, Israel went to war against the Hezbollah in
Hezbollah.
Lebanon, and they failed. They were beaten back. So this myth of Israel invincibility is utter nonsense. It is just a Western military garrison. It is US fighting in the name of Israel, as it is doing in Ukraine. So I think this also now, they have come to a peace deal with Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And I think that Trump, because he's had good relations with Saudi Arabia and all that, he'll try to kind of have some kind of a patch. And I must say another thing here, that it's not just Israel and the West alone, that the entire Arab world is silent witness to what is happening in
Yeah,
Palestine.
exactly.
The Arab countries are more afraid of the Palestinians who are more modern-minded and progressive because they don't want their own people who are controlled by, despotic rulers to get any ideas of freedom, liberation or modernity
Right.
from the Palestinians.
Right.
And this is not happening now. This has been happening from the 70s.
Okay. So we have less time, but there are two more things that I
Yeah.
want to ask. The Chinese food when you had in China and the Chinese food that you have here, which one did you like more?
Chinese food in China is Chinese food.
And the one we have here?
Chinese food in India is like Italian food in India. It's like English breakfast in India, American breakfast. You get pasta in all these places in India. None of them may add up to Italian food. And they'll give you Italian minestrone soup, French onion soup. You can give it any name. And it is just like you call something like Gobi Manchurian. There is no such dish anywhere else in the world, not even in Manchuria, which is now part of China. So actually there is a joke. So in all these Chinese restaurants, because this brings together both food and Bollywood, in all these Chinese restaurants, you have these young Chinese girls who come to India, watch these films, and they learn Bollywood dancing. Just like there is no genre called Bollywood dancing, but they learn that. And in these restaurants, they are all kind of dancing in the evening in the Indian restaurants. So somebody said, but why are the Chinese kind of doing this? This doesn't make sense. So people said, no, the Chinese are taking revenge for the Chinese food that India is serving.
The similar treatment to the
Yeah,
Indian
so
dance.
Chinese food is like this Bollywood in China.
Yeah.
And who makes Chinese rice with basmati? You please tell me. And most of that is the sticky rice that is very popular in
Yeah.
all over East Asia.
Yeah.
So, and the original Chinese restaurants, of course, they have adapted it to India. In India, they know people eat rice and noodles, so they kind of make it one egg fried rice. You go to China, you won't get that. You will get clear rice, and then you order
So
the sweet dishes.
one word for the Indian Chinese food.
Huh?
One word for the Indian
Indian
Chinese
food is Indian Chinese food. Yes.
Okay.
No, but there are a whole lot of Chinese food, including vegetarian, which one can.
Oh, Chinese are vegetarian.
A whole
And they
lot of
don't eat dogs?
There are lots of them.
Do they eat dogs?
No.
Yulin festival.
No, in some
We have
places
seen videos
but
where-
of late there is a movement. There has been now for some decades a movement against eating cats and dogs because these are the creatures which are very close to the human beings. So for
Yeah,
that reason,
yeah.
But it is possible that in times past there were eating
And
dogs.
snakes?
Huh?
Snakes. Snake.
The snakes are there and all in Korea and everything.
But do Chinese eat?
Chinese.
Indians love to quote, oh, see, Chinese eat.
You will find that Korean restaurants are there in China as well. So it is mainly in North.
But this is not the staple diet. Every day you're eating snake.
No, where I saw a snake and I was interested is in a bottle of Korean alcohol. There was a kind of a snake crushed into it. I mean, it was in full. It was not, its physical body was not damaged in any way, but it was kind of bottled up.
Right.
So that kind, and a lot of animal parts are used, not only in food, but also in alcohol, in spirits. And the Chinese have those things. It's a very East Asian.
You told us about one of the alcohol in China, which is like 70% or 60% alcohol in their Chinese wine.
Oh, they have this thing called Mautai, not in the wine. This is made from sorghum. And so recently I said, oh, it has got 65%. So the young Chinese lady said, no, you've not been in China a long time enough. It's not 65, it is 66%. So, but they have even more than that. And they really drink large quantities of it.
Right. Chinese drink a lot, huh?
Chinese drink, I suppose in
Like
India
Indians
also,
love whiskey, they love...
Oh, they have all that. You will get all. Actually, you will find that the Chinese market is more international, far, far more international than the Indian market. You go to a Chinese market, you will find everything you want, whether you're from Italy, from the Mediterranean, from the West, from India, from wherever. You go to an Indian market, you won't find everything that even Indians from all parts of India would want in one city. You may not find it.
Right.
So that way it is quite extraordinary. The kind of expansion of the Chinese economy is phenomenal. And the variety it provides from all over the world. You can choose the countries from which you want to buy butter or bread or cheese. Where can you choose in India? You can't. You don't have the market for it in India.
Well, this conversation won't end. Shastriji, I called him because we wanted to talk about war, the dictators, the democracies, and of course the food and alcohol, everything. So Shastriji will keep connecting with us. and giving us insights about what is happening in this world, because Shastri ji's experience is immense. We also wanted to talk about what is happening in the field of journalism, and we'll talk about it soon in our next podcast with him. And he will tell us more, what was it like being a journalist in 50 years back than today, and how comfortable you are to criticize the government in today's world. Well, thank you so much for your time, Shastri ji, coming to our office and telling us so much about Putin, India, China, why the war won't stop. That is the biggest point.
Thank you, Ragit.
Thank
Thank
you
you
for
for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, sir.
Don't miss out. Log on to oneindia.com for more updates.